Hi, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you again for joining us. We're going to get started now. I am Valerie Fajardo. I'm a research fellow with the International Nitrogen Network, and I'm your host for the first session of the Road to COP. Just a quick explainer of what the Road to COP is. So it is a webinar series. Um, Featuring the climate working group experts who will discuss the intersection of climate change and nitrogen, the solutions that could address both, and the benefits that can derive from those solutions. So today we're exploring a topic that doesn't always get the attention that it deserves, nitrogen and how indigenous knowledge systems can offer solutions. We're joined today by Bedanga Bordeloi, who works at the intersection of ecosystem thinking, indigenous practices, and nitrogen management. Bedanga is a senior consultant in regenerative agriculture, natural resource management, and sustainable food systems. He advises the Indigenous Partnership, co-founded Plantanista and Gen Ag, and contributes to the International Nitrogen Network's Climate Working Group. In 2021, he was appointed by the Supreme Court of India as a soil expert following the Bagjan gas blowout, and spent over a decade leading one of Asia's largest UN-funded environmental remediation programs. He holds a master's in agriculture from Banaras Hindu University and has completed executive programs at Harvard Business School and MIT. So welcome, Vedanga, and thanks for agreeing to share your expertise today.
Thanks, Val. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for having me and for this opportunity to discuss this topic, which has actually got some attention in the last couple of COP because the indigenous people are increasingly being given a space. And I have been fortunate that I have the opportunity to work in indigenous territories and communities across the world, being also an advisor of the Indigenous Partnership based out of Rome, where I work with various indigenous communities in Asia and Africa. Today's topic, just to set a context, I will pull out a slide, if you allow me, and maybe share some of the perspective that I have, or I think on the behalf of the indigenous communities that I interact with. These are the perspectives coming directly from the ground, and these are not perfect. That is, I think, the first point to be remembered. These might not be all scientifically validated, and today's group of scientists and policymakers that you might have questions that we might always go back to the communities and engage with them. So that's I think, the starting point I would start with. I'm grateful for the wisdom and stewardship of the indigenous community, whose ancestral knowledge continues to guide even today most of our work, of our understanding of the living soil. And this is, I think, one of the most important point that I want to cite today, that I think looking at soil from the NPK perspective and moving beyond that towards the holistic idea of also looking at the biological angle is something that we all need to focus. Though I understand purely that this is purely a nitrogen focus a platform, but I think that we are also in a place where this platform is helping to amplify the voice of the indigenous communities in shaping a equitable soil health future. Now, coming to the topic, effective nitrogen management for indigenous communities is more about utilizing the traditional ecological knowledge with the sustainable low-cost practices, which ultimately helps in improving soil productivity, reducing the reliance on any kind of synthetic fertilizer. Having said that, the important point here is also to acknowledge that indigenous communities are existing. They are only a 5% of the whole global population, but they are conserving and protecting 80% of the biodiversity that is recognized by various global bodies. I think that's why today's conversation about how they have been working around and how they are working still with limited resources, but still preserving the biodiversity and still managing the nitrogen cycle is something I think we should be discussing. But before we go that, I think one common theme that we see in the news today, and I go to the current news today. If you look at the current news today, we see news about the the price increase of food, price increase of fertilizer, price increase of various commodities and gas, natural gas, and this is impacting and going to impact as far FAO in various countries in the coming time, in coming months, depending on where the scenarios goes into. But at the same time, if you look at it minutely, I think the whole overall shock is because of the underlying structural problem that we all exist in. I think we are, as a modern agriculture system, we have to, rely on the synthetic nitrogen, which is, in fact, we all know, at least the communities here, that we all know that the actual available nitrogen is wasted, and that nitrogen waste is a big issue. But again, we are still continuing to focus on that, and hence we see an issue like a situation like a crisis that we are facing today is actually is also a time to reflect and think that how are these 5% of the community of the global population which are resilient and have been living without LPG gas, without without fertilizer, how they have been surviving. We should also understand that. So I think today's session is to try to unlock few of those elements and see which of those can be utilized maybe or can be scaled up. And in fact, just before coming to the meeting, I was listening to the Prime Minister of Bhutan in the Conscious Food System Summit, which is just happening parallelly as we speak. And he also said the same thing just 10 minutes ago, that I think we have to recognize that the way the indigenous communities look at soil is they have a relationship with soil. They don't look at it as a system where they will only give us food. They look at the soil as how do we feed the soil first so that it gives us something back after some time. But it's not only purely so it's a relationship that they have with the soil rather than transactional.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any questions?
No. Please go ahead.
Okay. So if we look at on the left hand side on today's the structural problem that we have, these are familiar sites and pictures or snapshots coming out of how the world is looking at, maybe looking at this logistical issue of diverting. We also have a chart on the extreme right hand side where you look at which other countries are purely dependent on this fertilizer and how this will pan out in a couple of years and months to come. But at the same time, let us go to the indigenous communities. Now, if we look at those indigenous communities, they are, number one, they are having a low fertilizer dependency, synthetic fertilizer dependency, and hence are naturally insulated from this price spikes. I have been, just 2 weeks ago, I've been to in Meghalaya, which is where the Khasi communities live, and there is available government schemes for LPG, but LPG is not used there because of the logistical terrain of the place in some of these locations. So it doesn't make sense to use the LPG cylinder and fill it up and make it available. So they are relying on
Sorry, give me 1 second.
Yeah, I think.
I'm sorry, could I just ask like all the participants to please mute your
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other angle that we also look at, or we can at least fairly anticipate, is the tightening credit situation. Capital will become expensive, but if you look at these indigenous communities, they have a very localized economy where there is community support, there is community co-funding on various aspects. So if you look at those areas, if you look at the circular nutrient flow or if you look at the less use of synthetic fertilizer and rather biological nitrogen fixation or use of organic matter, all this direct towards three important things. One is within the perspective of nutrients, or particularly focus on nitrogen, they are fixing nitrogen biologically, number one. Number two, they are recycling a lot of nutrients locally. And number three, they have a very minimal dependency on external inputs. And fourthly, they have already, if you look at the overarching foods security problem that we are all anticipating in other parts, they have a local, highly diversified food system, which will continue to make them resilient. And we have seen that time and again, even during the COVID time, that they have been resilient enough in doing so. But again, going back to the specific aspects of indigenous food system, as I said earlier, soil and indigenous people have a very sacred relationship with each other. Sorry.
Yeah,
I
no.
just
No,
okay.
I think the context is definitely important. I think one, you pulled out a few really important things to focus on. That we do talk. I mean, we are the International Nitrogen Network, and so we do talk about nitrogen management specifically. But when we talk about agriculture and we talk about transitioning systems or different systems, it's primarily a whole. We have to take a holistic view because nitrogen is one of the nutrients, and fertilizers are one of the things that go into the soil to help food production. But really we're talking about an entire system and not just that one specific substance. So I think that's important to remember. And also, like, I mean, I appreciate that you contextualized how fragile the dependency in synthetic fertilizer is, especially given the current geopolitical context. And so also acknowledging that the current system that we have is not necessarily sustainable for many people in the world, and we're already feeling those effects right now. But before we even like get to all of the, I mean, you have a lot of experience in this field, and you definitely have a lot of case studies and a lot of knowledge to share. I think I want to step back a little bit and just for the benefit of our more general like audience. So why should we even care about nitrogen in the climate conversation? But also contextualizing that within your perspective as someone who works with indigenous communities.
Yeah, thanks, Val. I think that's a great place to start also to so that the people present in this webinar understand that we often talk about carbon in the context of when we talk about climate change, we talk about carbon, but nitrogen is just as important and as complex. Um, uh, in simple terms, if we add into this system, if we add too much of nitrogen into the agriculture food system, especially through synthetic fertilizer, or even definitely it happens through other means also, but especially through fertilizer, a large part of it doesn't directly go to the crop. 50% to 70% of it is not used. Instead, it escapes to the environment as nitrous oxide primarily, but also other nitrates and all, which is nitrous oxide specifically is a very powerful greenhouse gas. We have numbers, it is 260 to 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide as pollution. And so the issue is not nitrogen itself, it is about how much we add and how efficiently we use it. And hence, this whole context of why we should be caring about nitrogen in the context of this system. Well,
Yeah. Sorry. So we're talking about like nitrogen, we're not really saying about nitrogen management. It's management. It's not complete like elimination. It is a nutrient that is needed in the soil, but it does need to
yes,
be managed a bit better.
yes.
So where do indigenous systems come into the picture here? And what do indigenous systems bring that more, I guess, mainstream or let's say like conventional like management methods don't?
Yeah. So I think what is fascinating about this indigenous people's food system, whether you take example of the Milpa system in Mexico or whether the Khasi system in Meghalaya or the elder-based nitrogen fixing system found in Nagaland, all of them, they don't talk about this excess nitrogen uh, issue to begin with. They don't talk about nitrogen waste. They have designed and they have been working on their soil from generations, some centuries, around balance. They generate nitrogen naturally, where I talk about biological nitrogen fixation, recycle it, keep it within the system. So in a way, they already know from generation to generation how to manage it. So instead of trying to fix the nitrogen pollution issue, I think is actually they are preventing the problem at the source, because they are not even reliant on the in any kind of synthetic fertilizer, to just to put the context.
Yeah. So I think it's a that's a key difference, right? So we're not. I mean, and it has like many benefits that we'll talk about later on. And I mean, it's addressing it at the source, not even putting all that excess and allowing the soil to recover. And all of these things are important, like in when we really think about nitrogen management, but also just in soil health as a whole. So can you give us a concrete example? So, I mean, I know you work with a lot, but and we have a limited time, but I'm going to ask you to pick a few of your favorites to give us like a concrete example of some indigenous practices that you've seen, or at least in your, I mean, in all of the work that you've done, have you've seen have worked, and maybe explain a little bit on why you think that worked in those specific contexts.
Sure. So I guess one widely documented one, and one of my friend from Mexico cites it well every time we meet, because he has been working on this a lot. The Milpa system of Mexico, and there is this very simple example. They have been growing maize along with legumes. Beans are legumes. They fix biological nitrogen, so they don't add any external inputs into the system. The system is providing the nutrients. So it's gradual, however, it's biological. It's meeting the needs, and has been working since generation. Now there has been a lot of paper has been published around it, that whether this will give immediate a nutrient, or is it has to be a long-term process. It is a gradual process. It needs patience. One thing that I learned, having worked in soil for remediation work, which is not necessarily this food system, is that for remediation one has to have patience. Patience is the most important thing that is required for any remediation work. Similarly, I guess if you look at this system, it's the whole thing is about a gradual, patient system of managing the system overall.
I think that's one of the tensions, with the requirements of food production in general. So today, like the food systems in multiple parts of the world are constrained, like to produce more. Not that doesn't mean that it's actually going and being consumed in the correct way. We also know that we have a lot of problem with food waste, right? So I mean, we're producing more, but also wasting more. And I think this process that requires patience is a little bit, I mean, it's not new, obviously, like indigenous peoples have used this, especially those in Mexico that you cited, but it's a practice that will require a bit of an adjustment. Would you agree? Is that if I mean,
Yeah,
obviously it's not a one size fits all, but it does require a bit of an adjustment.
definitely. We have to have a balanced look. It is not about scaling what they already have, because definitely that to meet the growing food need by 2050, we are talking about 10 billion. Only replicating this system won't suffice. We have to have a balanced look. And I think across the various nations, we have seen that balance process is going on. For example, just today, just before, I think I saw a notification from the government of India to all the states, state agriculture being a state subject, to all the states of India, saying that we have to look at having a very systematic approach to use green manuring this year. I think also looking at the underlying reason definitely is that there is going to have an impact on the urea delivery, but also making sure that whatever was already existing in those pockets all across the states, green manuring has been practiced for many centuries. But I think just to activate those practices again, these is, I think, one of these approaches that even the government is scaling up. The natural farming system, we already have a large-scale natural farming system that is being promoted. at scale just to make sure that the yield spikes or the yield impacts or the income impacts are minimized. It is done in a gradual way in large states like Uttar Pradesh, in Andhra Pradesh, in Maharashtra. So I think in a gradual way, the system has understood that I think we need to go back and see that for scalable approach, we need to take it a step by step, context specific. Even I think the indigenous community, they have a very context specific approach for managing it. It's not a one size fit all. Every system that I've seen has their own approach. If I take, for example, in Thailand, in the rice system or the paddy system, farmers return the crop residues back to the soil. Now, that is a gradual and slow process. Microbes takes time, and nitrogen is released over time, not immediately. So, but instead of a sudden spike, this is a very steady supply that matches the need of the system and is happening there, working there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, I mean, you surfaced this a little bit, and I think we wanted to get into this later in the discussion. It's that using what's there actually also helps the communities that are also there. And so it's not, and you mentioned, I said it, you said it too, it's not a one size fits all. But I mean, you talked a little bit about what's happening in India and and you talked about what's happening in Thailand. But I mean, I kind of want to focus on what's happening closer to home because it's also what's, I mean, it's very, I mean, you're our resource speaker in this region as well. You mentioned a bit, I mean, I think when we spoke before, you mentioned practice in Uttar Pradesh or in Northeast India. So I want to just ask you, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess, like to talk about those a little bit.
Sure. So I'll take two examples. Maybe one is in UP, having been to various districts within UP, Uttar Pradesh. I have seen that traditionally, and even in now in some places, there are certain communities that have engagement with other communities and work on the system of cattle penning. They invite those communities to their land. Uh, Cattle panning is done in a specific locations. They exchange instead of monetary transaction, there is transactions of some barter. Say grains are being exchanged instead of any money being given. But I think the cattle is being stationed overnight. Urine, excreta are being, residues are being overturned in the soil and they move on. So the cattle penning system is there. Then there is the whole system of the bottom of the pond soil being excavated and utilized. And there is also in northeast, nearer to northeast, in Meghalaya, the whole shifting cultivation, wherein they are utilizing various regeneration systems to make sure that the nutrients are being conserved, the nutrients are being provided to the soil, and most importantly, the food system is very diverse. They are not growing one or two. In fact, in one of the locations that I have been, one of the village, there are 53 different food crops being grown in that system in a place. So I think just imagine the kind of diversity that they are focusing on, and hence making sure that the forest is maintained, the water is maintained, the soil is maintained, and meeting the needs of the people.
So you mentioned the cultivation system or shift in cultivation. So I understand like there's a debate like around this topic. I think what I'm curious about is, well, one, like what are the main issues that surround this debate that you have seen like in your own practice, and are there answers to those issues that have been effective or maybe less effective? Because I imagine like for folks who are looking to adopt like some of these systems, or at least to propose some of these systems in their own communities, maybe those issues are also salient, and maybe your experience in trying to address them, or at least what you know in trying to address them, might also be helpful.
Sure. See, I will talk about the shifting cultivation a bit, and also about this elder-based nitrogen fixation system. You know, the elder is a fast-growing nitrogen fixing tree that the one you see in the picture. It's pollarded. It's also extensively done used in Nagaland. It's quite famous here. And it has been happening in this part of the world, whether it is in Sikkim, whether it is in Nepal, or whether it is in China, in various elder tea system or elder cardamom system. It has been happening there. There is a lot of debate around the whole burning issue. That definitely, when there's a burning phase, you see emission. It's bad for the nature. Definitely, that part is there. But I think what they do is a very controlled kind of a burning, and and even it's a very culturally linked. So of late, it has come to a full circle. There are many states within the Northeast where they first of all understood that it is bad. They promoted monocropping. They understood it did not work. They came back to a more refined form of this shifting cultivation or a local system. So I think it's a whole circle that has happened, that the communities have understood what needs to be fixed, what's to be refined, what needs to be co-created along with the scientists, and a lot of work is still going on how do we preserve the local system. In fact, the last month or just a couple of months ago, Nagaland government has come up with a brand new Nagaland agriculture policy, where the whole policy is around how do we make sure that the local indigenous systems are being preserved and promoted at scale. But definitely refinement on some angles, but not to purely discard it off the table, which was primarily a point at 1960s, where it was looked at as something which is bad for the state, bad for the people. But now it has come back. So, but they have understood that of late the system is self-regenerating. I think that's the word here: regenerating the systems, having a relationship with the system is what they have understood since centuries, and I think that is what now again we are doing. We are reconnecting with nature. We are talking about whether you call it regenerative system, whether you call it shifting, or whether you call it natural. I think at the end of the day, it's about this whole perspective that this indigenous community have. I've been working with the communities, the youths of the communities, as well as elders, and we come up with a very elder-led and a youth-led kind of a conversation on the ground to make sure that the knowledge that the elders had been practicing is passed on and is documented, and and also work with scientists from various research institutes, so that we come up with we co-develop solutions specific to the context and specific to the current changing circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think that concept of co-creation, I mean, it sounds like maybe it sounds like, oh, that it's such a no-brainer. And I mean, like, of course, like if you want to work with indigenous peoples or with anyone in general, like you would think that it should be co-created, but it's actually less of a mainstream practice. But the fact that, I mean, it's meeting like science, or at least like what we construe was conventional science, whatever that means, right? Um, Having that meet with indigenous knowledge systems is equally important. And I'm going to go a little bit off script here, because we did get like a question on the chat, and I know I said like we might address this like when we were speaking, we might address this like towards the end, but I think we're naturally like this is where we're going anyway. There's a question from Professor Kem Raj Dahal, and he asks like these knowledge bases are getting eroded at a high speed, and I mean, is there and co-creation and making sure that scientists like on the ground are also meeting with indigenous peoples is one of the ways, right? That we can perpetuate like this knowledge. Like, what has been your experience? I mean, is it a difficult like thing to do? And there's also this question of efficiency and speed and all of these things. So like just talk a little bit about that experience
Yeah.
in using this method.
Sure. I think that's a very good question. And in fact, I will try to give you a perspective on a very recent project that we did with some of the schools in Meghalaya. And the context was that there were some existing government schools which were being supported under a national program on school meal. But as you know, because of the logistical challenges in this part of the world, there is challenge about making sure that all the supplies arrive in those schools every week. So we were looking at how do we utilize the local resources, the biodiverse local resource. We also looked at the nutrition issue of the children's, because if you look at the data of children's in Meghalaya, they are one of the worst, performing in terms of they're stunted. There is deficiency. There is anemic. There are a lot of issues on the nutrition side. So we try to see how do we, manage all this at the same time, make sure that the farmers, local farmers are benefited, the children's are benefited, the systems, the school meal program runs at a efficient level. And so we combined, collaborated with various stakeholders, right from the government to local NGOs to farmer groups, cooperatives, and we came up with a very a circular procurement model, which basically revolves around the fact that no all waste is designed out of the system. Any kind of waste is designed out. So though it might look at the shifting cultivation area, there is there is a lot of food still gets wasted there because of the logistics. So we say, let us divert and make sure that it is a self sustainable system of school meal, where local farmers provide the diverse wild edibles, or what you call the underutilized species, NUS in short. They are a part of the school meal. So we also did a lot of nutrition study on this wild edibles, and we found that in some cases they are far more nutritious than the available other alternative. For example, some of the wild edibles were having higher amount of vitamin A, vitamin C compared to the other available alternatives in the market. So in that way, we came out with a mapping of all the available, nutrition wild edibles, as well as we also looked at the school, and we brought in all together. In short, what I would say is collaboration, systems thinking, and making sure that there's a local economy is created around it, because I think money speaks everywhere, but we need to make sure that it is self-sustaining, and that is where we build piece by piece. We build district by district, village by village, and finally we have, as of now, we have built around the system around at least 60 schools, and we are aiming to have it around in 200 schools by the end of this year. So I think in a way, collaboration is important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things that I pick up on there. Is that one, the importance of also wading into the nutrition like element. So because we are dealing with food systems, I know there's a tendency just like, okay, we're dealing with synthetic fertilizers, we're dealing with how we manage synthetic nitrogen, but what goes into the soil is what produces food. And so like
Yeah.
that issue of nutrition is also important, and being able to talk about that as a co-benefit possibly of having more sustainable localized systems that draw knowledge from indigenous systems. Indigenous systems of knowledge is important, but also that concept of thinking more locally as well. That our home is where our food is grown, right? And so in that sense, that empowering local communities is also just as equally important. We're not, I mean, we tend to think in global systems because we are international network, and we like to think, okay, well, we know what the emissions are, we know somewhat what the numbers are for nitrogen pollution, et cetera. And our solution, because we work in the international space, is, well, we definitely need to think internationally as well. But I think in terms of granularity and nuance in terms of solutions, I think local context is equally important. Um, okay, I'm gonna get to the questions in a little bit, but I think there is, if you had to simplify the science behind
Mm.
all of these examples, because like you have quite a number of examples, and I'm cognizant of the fact that they don't just address nitrogen pollution, right? But if you had to simplify that science in a way that nitrogen people would understand, and I'm sure people do understand, but for a more general audience, how would you do
Yeah.
it? Because I don't envy this job, and I'm sorry to ask this question, but how would you do it?
Yeah. So I anticipated that, and I said, okay, let me at least pull this out, that, okay, we do understand that there is a science behind it. But I think what I did was I pulled up some of the and management stage that was very recently published out in the by the INM. And I tried to map out for this particular webinar, I tried to map out those stages and try to map out all the indigenous practices. And I mapped out also the nitrogen processes and the implication on climate. And I think the science in short is that uh, the modern system talks about managing the nitrogen waste. Now we have updated the target about aiming at making 50% of the nitrogen waste. I think this is something that the indigenous system has already been doing and working on. They already have this mindset of a circular economy. They already have a mindset of no waste. And I think that is what we have to understand. I think what we have to do is to blend that knowledge. And I saw that out of the 150 measures that were mapped out in this framework of the INM document, I saw that across the 7 stages, there are several of those activities which were already can be seen in the indigenous food system. I think these are, I think, given a name of scientific naming, but I think they are already being done. And there are already a huge, base of peer-reviewed journal on the indigenous practices. More so, not so in the part that I am from. It's gradually happening, but I think it will happen now because I think the important thing is that the elders had the knowledge, the youths are there. We are trying to connect both of them right now. We are bringing in technology also so that youths are attracted towards this and they understand that what the elders have been doing is something which is very, very useful. And I think that is what we need this community to also support. That can we bring it from funding? Can you help them with technology? Can we help them with support on research? I think, and then help this local youths to actually be the flag bearer. I think that is what we are also doing. We are trying to build the capacity of the youths to link with their elders and try to see what works in their local system. Because of late we have system, the global supply chain is not working well. And I think empowering the local systems is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I'm going to ask the next difficult question. And it's the question on scale. So I think we mentioned earlier, and you mentioned also like earlier, and how even the global system is fairly fragile, and what we need right now to be able to feed more people is is also kind of like a sustainable scaling up of of these practices. So can the systems feed the world, understanding of course that it's not a one size fits all. And we did get a question also in the chat from Iman, and it's like can these traditional practices be blended with new technologies? Is that a way to scale up?
Yeah, so first of all, as I said at the beginning, that these systems in the indigenous places are efficient and resilient, at least locally. But as we scale up, definitely the challenge of volume, challenge of connect supply chain happens. But with technology, most of the challenges can be reduced and hence can be scaled. Technology is definitely one of the answer of how do we do it, but most importantly, partnership, the right partners to come on board. We have been trying to do various pilots, but I think there are a lot of organizations doing pilots. But I think what we need is more of a global effort to make sure that these are done at a more regional or sub-regional level, because there are already examples which are successfully being established. I give the example of elder based system. This is quite successful for centuries. It has been happening. If you look at the Milpa system, there are pockets of research, tons of research done in Mexico. So I think more or less we do have evidence, but I think what we basically also need to be aware is that the indigenous communities or communities that I have gone to, I think many organizations come, but without free and prior and informed consent, they try to publish or try to utilize some of this know-how, and hence the trust level, which is also prevalent all across the supply chain, right? We are at a very the whole trust issue is very liquid across various systems. I think that is also something that we need to work on, and I think we are working on. It's a work in progress, but I think these elements has to be balanced out. The way forward is probably not replacing anything with, say, I'm not saying that we should be replacing synthetic fertilizer with what they have been doing, but I think in some way, already practices or national programs have been designed. I gave you the example of green manuring today. This was, this has been happening, but it was one of the uh, good to have side dishes, but now it is utilized in the main dish, right? So I think most of this side practices will come on to be mainstream, but I think this is the right time. I think if you take any national newspaper in India right now, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, you will only listen and read news about how do we make sure that we don't make sure that we utilize this crisis, because every big crisis should be, I think, there is a saying that every big crisis should not be missed, because you can do a lot by making sure that right now we have a very distorted subsidy system, fertilizer subsidy system. I think this is the right time to maybe do some DBT, direct benefit transfer, to the farmers, make sure that they have a choice to make sure the fertilizer that they want to use or the nutrients they want to use are done. Right now it is distorted towards nitrogen. We have gone from a 4:2:1 to 10.2:4.2:1. I think maybe the current situation maybe might help to streamline some of these practices of natural and regenerative practices in the mainstream. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I think there is that. I mean, unfortunately, as a as a species, we tend to learn through crisis, and so
Yeah.
now we are once again like plunged into potentially a food security crisis like all over the world. Which, I mean, I hate to say that it's an opportunity because it's obviously not great for a lot of people, but we do need to learn from what's going on
Yeah.
currently. And I think I'd like to pick up on on something that you said, that free prior informed consent, so FPIC, with indigenous communities. I mean, certainly, like in my practice as an environmental lawyer, it's also one of the issues that environmentalists tend to run into when interacting with indigenous communities. There's also this question of land tenure rights, and I mean, I don't want to quiz you on any of this, but I think just in terms of your experience, and then now I'm just going completely off the rails because it's completely off the book. I'm just going to ask you more about your work. That what strikes me is that all of these indigenous systems requires a certain kind of security in land rights, like in land tenure, because the way it plays out, you have to. I mean, from what I understand, is that it plays out not in just a span of, I don't know, in a year, right? So we're thinking in terms of, we're thinking more long term, and the benefits you can measure, I can imagine, through in long term, right?
Yeah.
And these practices are effective because they've been in these communities, in these areas for a certain amount of time. And in your experience, like working in India, or maybe in your interactions with other folks like in this specific field, how important is that relationship in, in making sure that indigenous peoples have security in their own land, to be able to actually demonstrate the effectiveness of these practices?
I think this is a on the table issue that all indigenous communities across the world have. I think more or less in some areas there has been progress. There are success stories. For example, one of our partner of TIP, the Ojek People's Community, Daniel, they were all across the newspapers on one of the largest win in terms of land rights in Kenya. Similarly, there are other innovative ways of ensuring land tenures, or ensuring the land is secured for the indigenous community, or that we have seen in Meghalaya, for example. There are certain villages within some districts which have tried innovative way of collectively, ensuring their land rights, coming together as they're all coming together into an institution or an entity. They have done that, and they are moving towards the various available options on the table. I think because they do understand that without the land rights, none of these initiatives that we are talking about for supporting them won't work. Even if you talk about government schemes, I think many of them have been not been able to take advantage of it because of their unavailability of land rights. So yeah, this is a very important issue, and things are in progressing. But I think again, support of the community, global community, will be required.
Great. Thanks. So now I'm going to open up if we have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up to just more to questions from folks. You can either drop a question in the chat or I don't know, maybe raise your hand because I think I can see most folks if you have a question. Um, okay, so as we wait for more, because this is a Road to COP series, so my question is, I mean, we focus a little bit on what local communities are doing and what Indigenous communities are doing, what local communities need to do to be able to support it. But if because it's a Road to COP, if you wanted to introduce this to the general climate change community, which is huge, we're meeting in Antalya in Turkey in November.
Yeah.
Like, how do you envision the UNFCCC, or
Mm.
maybe not the UNFCCC, maybe not UN climate change, but maybe desertification or any other like treaty body, let's say. How do you envision that body, this issue while surfacing there, or maybe how that body can like
Mm.
help, or yeah, yeah, what's the vision?
Yeah. Sure. So I think in some way, if I look back at the last 2 or 3 COPs, I see that a lot of progress has been made. For example, the Kali Fund has been established and is hopefully operational now, where it will be working on various indigenous led restoration effort. But I think if I look back at some of the work that needs to be done, one is, as you said just a few minutes ago, about land governance needs to be strengthened, well defined. Tenure rights, both individual and collective, are non-negotiable for any kind of future investment in soil management by the indigenous people. That is number one. Number two is to at least there should be a kind of an indigenous soil stewardship platform under the UNFCCC or UNCCD to integrate these ITKs or the TKs into the climate soil policies that we talk about. Funding has, to some extent, through the Kali Fund, but I think funding indigenous-led restoration project through direct access is important because the restoration of the degraded land, there are a lot of lands within the indigenous community which are degraded. They are working on it, and I am also involved in a couple of it. But I think all this needs more streamlining. There are standards already have been published, but I think more or less operationalizing it on ground needs more support, capacity building, including indigenous representative in both national as well as international soil and land restoration delegation. It has been done, but I think more efforts are required to promote the SLMPs, making sure that the economic realities that they face, because we have to also understand that the IPs, they are 5% of the global population, but they also account for more than 15% of the extremely poor, as per the UNFPII 2016 data. So they are lagging behind in many aspects on social and economic indicators. I think we have to also look at that reality. So hence, recognition and legal protection of the indigenous bioculture, land tenure system, and knowledge system is another important aspect. And then another point I already mentioned is about they need to appreciate and recognize that the IP knowledge must be used with free, prior, and informed consent.
Thanks. So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I think we're going to move to close the session now. But you provide a very balanced perspective also a realistic perspective on Indigenous practices benefiting nitrogen management in general, but then also the reality of having to implement these systems like on the ground. And I'm very grateful for your expertise. But if you're any parting shots, any last words, I mean, on this topic, like any final thought you'd like to leave us with before we close?
No, I guess on the nitrogen front, we have maybe a lot of documentation that needs to be done in a more systematic way, because I have tried and attempted to do some, but I think all this needs to be streamlined. And I guess more and more colleagues and partners and peers who are working on it, we can maybe join together to do so. That is my call for our platform. Yeah. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I just wanted to say, I mean, and thank you so much, Bedanga. I mean, I know it's hard to be the first person. Like we're still trying to figure out like the format of this webinar series, but I'm grateful that you're game and it was really an excellent presentation, and definitely like learned a lot. For folks who are not of the Climate Working Group, this is a regular. We'll try to make this as regular as we can. We do have more speakers lined up for April, and they think the next April and then June. We're trying to figure out people who might be free in May. But and thank you so much for David and for Carson for being here. I know you both are very, very busy, and appreciate all of your support for the Climate Working Group and what we do or what we try to do throughout this year. For those who are in the Climate Working Group, and if you do want to share your expertise as well as Bedanga just did, there is a sign-up sheet that's being circulated, and you can just let us know when you're available. And for the others, we look forward to continuing to have you join us and to have your expertise and excellent like questions. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll be in touch with the next speaker in the series. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.